Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you're joining us from around the world, you are welcome. We're excited to have you here today for the last episode of the MERL Talk series, brought to you by YouthForesight. Thank you once again for being with us today. As we get started, please feel free to say hi in the chat. Let us know your name, the organization you're with, and where you're tuning in from. So, over the course of this series, we've explored how strong adaptive monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning practices can deepen the impact, can sharpen strategy, and inform smarter decisions in youth-focused programs. Today, in particular, we turn our attention to research and inquiry in youth livelihoods. We will explore how rigorous research and thoughtful inquiry can uncover what works, what doesn't, and why. I am your moderator for this episode. My name is Yvette Odoyo. I am a youth advocate and communication strategist with a background in international relations, and I recently just completed my degree in law. I currently serve as a knowledge management intern at GenU, and I'm also a member of the Young People's Action Team. This topic personally interests me because I've seen how powerful evidence can be in shaping better programs and creating real opportunities for young people. When we basically take the time to ask the right questions, look into the right data, and learn from what's working and what's not, we are capable of improving projects as well as future investments. I'm super excited to dive into today's conversation and learn more together. Our goals today in particular are twofold. First, to strengthen your ability as youth skills and livelihoods practitioners to design, implement, and use research and learning for greater program effectiveness. And secondly, to spark meaningful dialogue about how we use data and insights to shape policies, scale what works, and drive lasting systemic change. To guide us through these important questions, we are joined today by two leading voices in the space, Kate Selam and Neil O'Higgins, and it is my pleasure to introduce them. Kate Selam is a sustainability professional with 20 plus years of corporate and operational experience shaping foreign investments worldwide to maximize host country benefits, resulting in innovative and cost-effective solutions, visible on the ground sustainability impacts, and strengthened relations with stakeholders. In her current role at Standard Chartered Bank, as Director of Impact, Kate is leading the development of a bank-wide impact management framework to measure the bank's contributions to the UN SDGs. This builds on recent leadership roles with Shell and BG Group managing risks and impacts and optimizing UN SDG contributions from energy investments in countries like Mozambique, Tanzania, Brazil, and Oman. Prior to that, Kate held senior consulting roles with ERM, advising a range of clients on sustainability issues. Culturally sensitive and results-driven, Kate has successfully led major strategic initiatives and regularly influenced at board level. A very warm welcome to you, Kate. Neil O'Higgins is a senior research economist in the ILO's Employment Analysis Unit. He holds degrees from Trinity College in Dublin, York, and Sheffield Universities, and a PhD from the European University Institute in Florence. Until 2023, he was a professor of economics at the University of Salerno. His main research interests cover various aspects of labor and experimental economics. He is one of the main authors of the ILO's biennial Global Employment Trends for Youth, and amongst his other recent publications are an edited volume on internships, employability, and the search for decent work experience, a book on youth employment policy entitled Rising to the Youth Employment Challenge, New Evidence on Key Policy Issues and Articles in, amongst many other journals, the European Economic Review, the Cambridge Journal of Economics, the Journal of Institutional Economics, and the BE Journal of Economic Analysis and Policy. Thank you both for joining us. Before we start, I'd like us to do a quick pop-up question that will come up in your screens just now. This question, we pose it to you as the audience. You can choose from more than one option in order of what's relevant to you. So the question is, what most interests you about using research and inquiry in youth livelihoods programming? And among the options you can select include understanding what works and why, using evidence to influence policy, improving program design and outcomes, scaling successful interventions, and of course, engaging youth meaningfully in the research process. So feel free to pick what resonates the most with you in order of the relevance to research and inquiry in youth livelihoods programming. I will give us a minute for us to answer that. Okay, so you should be able to see the results on your screen as right now. At the top of our list, we have understanding what works and why. A majority of us fall in between using evidence to influence policy, improving program design and outcomes, engaging youth meaningfully in the research processes, and lastly, scaling successful interventions. Thank you so much for participating. I would like us to dive right into the conversation. So this first question I would like to direct to Neil. What does a typical week in your role look like, particularly in relation to MERL? And of course, this question will be answered by both speakers. In the essence of research and learning, in particular in youth programs, what does a typical week in your role look like? I'd like to hear from you, Neil.
Hi, Yvette, and hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd say I don't really have a typical week. Indeed, I would say that's one of the big benefits for me of the job that I do. But having said that, I work for the ILO's Employment Analysis Unit, and as that name suggests, I mainly do analysis of employment-related issues, often global, but also regional and sometimes national levels. One area that I'm quite proud of is the work I've been doing on NEET that is young people not in employment, education and training over the recent years. I often, but don't always, work on youth, and similarly, I often, but don't always work on evaluation issues, but they are both rather high up on my work agenda. When I do look at evaluation, this is mainly to do with collating and analysing evaluation evidence produced by others, but I sometimes do specific evaluations, and I'll provide a link to that later on. I'm currently working also on a diagnostic analysis of school to work transitions in West Africa. This I find very interesting, and there the focus is very much again on needs and how to reduce needs in these specific countries. And right now I'm also preparing a presentation to be made on how we go about measuring interventions in youth labour markets, and so that's coming up. Another area that I'm increasingly interested in is looking at diagnostics in fragile settings, and this is another area where the employment evaluation related research is very relevant, like looking at the impact of disasters and fragility more generally on youth and adult labour market outcomes. And last but not least, I do spend some of my time interacting with colleagues from within the ILO and with other organisations, as well as providing policy advice to constituents, which is, after all, is the main direct or indirect outcome of my work. So I think that's enough for me for now.
Thanks, Neil. I think it's really fascinating to hear how dynamic your week is and not necessarily with a typical overflow of work. The balance between diagnostic work, high level advisory roles, for example, and just a general preparation for global initiatives, I believe truly highlights the strategic depth that MERL requires at a global level. Over to you, Kate. What does a typical week in your role look like?
Thanks, Yvette, and hi everyone. Really honoured to be here. So interesting contrasting perspective from Neil, who works at a kind of a more global level, which is really important, obviously. And my perspective is coming from the Standard Chartered Foundation, the philanthropic part of Standard Chartered Bank, where I work. And we obviously, well, not obviously, but we disperse grants and actually get actively involved in with our NGO partners in programming on the ground. So for us, the role of the research and learning side of things is really about making sure that we're deepening the impact of our programs. Just to give a little bit of context about the programming that we do, and the scale, we have a budget of 120 million to spend to 2030. And we work with, well, we've just slimmed it down, but to about 9-10 main strategic NGO partners, covering programs in 28 countries. So those countries in many of the countries that Standard Chartered operates in. And our aim is also focused on the employability entrepreneurship side of things as a route to tackling youth empowerment, or kind of enabling youth empowerment and tackling inequality. My role in terms of the impact measurement side of things, it's not just about collecting data, which is clearly absolutely critical. It's making sure that the data and the insights that we collect through our partners is really telling us a realistic kind of picture, providing a realistic picture of what's happening on the ground and what type of impact we're having, so that we can be flexible and pivot, really support our partners in improving delivery. But also it's making sure that we can tell the right story around the data, and making sure it's evidence-based, it's rich, it's deep in evidence. We know what we're talking about, and we're telling it in a compelling way that really kind of attracts support and engagement. Actually, it's really important that kind of resonates within the bank, that we can actually harness the skills and support from our colleagues as well, and in some cases our clients. So no typical week. I mean, there's few jobs that have a typical week, except that I'm always standing at my desk and doing online meetings. But every meeting's different, and we go through cycles. We have 2 reporting cycles a year. We're just going through the mid-year one now. We have one theory of change that is kind of fixed main metrics, but within that, we obviously need to make sure there's a lot of flexibility, because the participants that we're targeting, the markets that we're focusing on, they're all different contexts. So there needs to be some flexibility in how these are applied. So we have to work really closely with our partners. And actually the learning, the research and the insights through and the learnings is a really important component to make sure that we're all continue to be aligned, and that we learn from the different ways that these programs are being implemented. We collaborate a lot with our partners. So aside from the data collection, we also have, which obviously we have a very kind of robust governance process and approach, a framework around the data side, but also we build into that the kind of the non-data side, the qualitative side, making sure that we are having the right number of touch points. I mean, we'd like more if we could, but a balanced number of touch points with our partners, so that we can actually solicit that feedback, really understand what's going on the ground. A couple of examples that have happened in like last week and this week, we had a partners day, which was gathering all our partners together, and we structure it around some of the questions they've asked that are common across everyone, so that we can have kind of mini workout sessions, kind of online virtual working sessions, so that we can actually share learnings and insights for different topics, such as. Some of our projects are quite new at the moment, so it's retaining, how to retain commitment of participants in the programs and try and reduce the number of dropouts, how to ensure accessibility to those that are more disadvantaged or people with disabilities, that kind of thing, which is a real focus of our programs. And we're currently finishing, we're about to publish next week actually, the impact report, which is, trying to bring it to life for everyone outside, both funders and colleagues and general public. So I'll certainly share that link on here as well. In terms of how we approach the research and learning side, in terms of topics, we establish a learning agenda each year. That's both ground up, so the partners themselves kind of tell us what types of research they think would they really want to understand better in order to improve their programming, and top down. So we identify research needs and gaps that we've identified through our data collection and our biannual cycle. It's not always easy to decide what to focus on because there's always so much to do, and research is never static, so you always need to kind of update it. But yeah, that's kind of the approach, and I think we'll probably talk a bit more about certain examples of what we're doing. So I'll pause there for the moment.
Okay, thanks, Kate. I like how you contextualized your role within the delivery and the grant making space. I think what stands out to me is how intentional your MERL approach is, from structured TOCs and reporting cycles to real-time partner collaboration and even learning agendas. I think the blend of top-down or bottom-up priorities is such a rich model for improved learning, especially where it's not really easy to come up with what to focus on, as you have also highlighted. I think this also naturally brings us into the second question, which has a more broader context. And Neil, I'd like us to kick off with your reflections here. What is your take on the current state of the sector, especially when it comes to research and learning in youth programs? Over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Yvette, and thanks, Kate. That was very interesting. Yeah, I've been working in this area for some time, basically my whole career, and it didn't start yesterday, as you can probably tell from the colour of my hair. Going back into the previous millennium, indeed. And I've seen many big improvements over the years. In particular, in the last decade or so, there's been a big expansion in the availability of data. In particular, for me, that means survey data, household survey data, labour force survey data, and also the number of evaluations that are actually undertaken. Along with that, there's been important developments in methodologies, both experimental and what I would call quasi-experimental approaches, which is the type I tend to use more than others. And I think possibly most importantly, there's been a big increase in the awareness of the importance of impact evaluation, of understanding what happened as a result of the implementation of specific interventions. Yeah, when I started, there was really, people didn't know what I was talking about when I started to talk about impact evaluation, and that's a big to be welcomed. And as I mentioned, there's also this big expansion of the evidence base on impact evaluations. Even they are much more frequent, and it's much more part of the norm, although not fully, I would say, as yet. And we've been using a lot of this evidence over the years the ILO has, led by Susana Puerto, been collating this evidence and producing a series of systematic reviews. So in the last one came out very recently, a systematic review of the impact of different types of youth intervention. And this can be very useful in terms of designing better policies, understanding what works and why, and so designing better youth policies. However, I think we can do more. I think we can get better. I think there's, for one thing, it's not always the case that I think the basic bottom line is that what we want to know is, or at least should be, influenced by what is the purpose of the program. So there can be a tendency to apply specific approaches to impact evaluation, but not necessarily ideal. So, for example, we do a lot in the ILO. We implement a lot of so-called public employment programs. That's public work programs, and these come out pretty badly in the evaluation literature, because the evaluation literature tends to be focused on the post-program impact of the interventions, whereas a public employment program has a rather more different. It's usually about infrastructure building, so there's big impacts outside the program. It also has a strong income support role. So there's the famous public works program in India, which is basically an income support measure, not rather than. So anyway, it's important to be clear about what the purpose is of the program. And another thing is to understand the importance and context of and complementarities of the program. Labour market programs and interventions for young people do not just happen and avoid, and what happens on that program will depend on what's going on outside. And I think that's that's an area that I myself have been particularly interested in, on looking at complementarities between programs in the youth labour market. And I think maybe to before I shut up, I think there is this. It's really important to look a bit more broadly at outcomes. So increasingly, and this is a welcome development, there's more concern with impacts on, for example, mental health and well-being amongst young people as an outcome, but also looking more broadly as the impact beyond the individuals themselves. And I think this is key moving forward, and looking to a more sort of socially based impact of.
Thanks, Neil. You've painted quite a compelling picture that takes us through the years in your experience, and I do agree with you that impact evaluations are more frequent, and it is important to be clear about the purpose of the program, and to also look more broadly on the impact that it has just beyond individual outcomes, which will then help us focus more on transformative outcomes. Thank you for that insightful comment. So, Kate, just a quick follow-up on this. How have the advancements that, for example, Neil has expounded on or highlighted, like increased data availability and the focus on contextual relevance, basically influenced the way Standard Chartered Foundation approaches its research and learning efforts, which of course speaks to us from a programming perspective? Over to you, Kate.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yeah, so I completely concur with what Neil's saying from our perspective. There's definitely a lot of research out there, which is fantastic. And there's a lot of research that's obviously being led by organizations like ILO that are kind of broader than individual organizations, NGOs, or projects can really grapple with. So that's incredibly helpful. And that definitely has helped us, because we, in terms of trying to hone in on, in terms of project design, what are the areas that we really want to focus on? What does the context look like? What are the gaps that exist in a particular market context? Kind of having that information available at least provides some data points and some context that helps you to kind of shape and design a program accordingly. One of the things that we've spent the last year or so working on, actually, just to pull these things together, bearing in mind, I guess, the one challenge with having so much data available is that there's almost sometimes too much. And just as Neil was saying, you have to understand what the data is referring to before you just use it. It's not black and white, like a particular research that comes out with a conclusion might not necessarily relate exactly to the market you're working in or to the participant that you're focusing on. So it's important to understand that. So, actually it's really, really key to actually pulling it together and making sure that it's actually works and is meaningful in the context that we're looking at. So given that we cover projects in 28 different countries, and because we work with a range of different NGO partners, so there's obviously differences in the approaches that are being applied. What we did to try and help kind of simplify this to some extent, to a large extent, actually, it's not perfect, but we developed a social return on investment model. Now, I know that there's a lot of these models around, but because of the range of programs and the diversity of geographies and contexts, we felt we needed to develop something that was bespoke to us, that would help us to kind of rely on the results it was telling us and use them in a way that would really help provide additional insights into what was really happening. And that was very much also recognizing the point that Neil made in that actually, whilst our main target of our programs is the main KPI is number of people accessing decent jobs and the number of micro businesses that become thriving that can then go on to create jobs. So those are the kind of the twin metrics that we work with. Obviously it doesn't stop there, and actually if you want to have an impact, you've got to really understand and continually remind yourself, or this is what we wanted to do, what impact we're trying to achieve through those outcomes, because those are outcomes. It's getting somebody into a decent job, what kind of pathway or impact on more broadly, and that is definitely about well-being. And so we've, in the model, which we brought in a lot of research. We didn't actually bring in research in 28 markets. We used 3 proxies, one to reflect a high income market, one to reflect a middle income market, and one to reflect a low income market, just to give us that sense of comparability. And so lots of data points that kind of supported not only how do you calculate things like some of these non-monetary, kind of data, kind of insights into a form that helps you to actually compare and contrast and kind of understand the scale of it in a bit more clearly. So we identified 14 or 15 key impacts, which probably don't cover everything, but it was just those were the priority ones that we wanted to capture, covering both the employability side of things and those additional benefits that are created through micro businesses, depending on the type of product or service that they're generating, and assign a monetary value through calculation trees. So it's quite complex, but we wanted a way of simplifying it whilst being comfortable with that the results of it actually tell us a story, that tell us a kind of a bit more about what the model is actually doing. And I would say that we also had the input of some of our NGO partners. We got some experts. We actually developed it with Impact Institute, who are based in the Netherlands, and it's still being refined. We still haven't got. We're quite comfortable, not perfectly comfortable, on the employability model, so we're kind of still testing it out. But some of the early results, kind of estimates, I'd say it's an estimate. We're not claiming that this is the impact we're having. We know that we're contributing to it through these routes, because obviously lots of other players, you can't really assign, kind of attribute all the impact to us. But it's just basically saying this is a story, is like, okay, so if we have in 2024, we helped get 54,000 people into decent jobs, and that kind of impacted the lives of 190,000 people, and that's through the households that they depend on, and that looks different from different markets. $10,000 is contributed by each person accessing a decent job, and that's just an estimate over a 3-year period post-program of the kind of impacts that having a decent job will have on society, and that's really calculating, putting a monetary value on well-being, on the role that that person, particularly someone with disabilities or someone from a really disadvantaged background, has in when they themselves quite often become a role model in their community, because they're one of few that are able to actually, kind of access a job like that. And as well as the income side of things. And we also calculated that for every $1 invested, that's creating $55 in societal value, which is probably different to some other models that are out there. But that's going to be the benchmark for us, and ones that we can kind of build up a kind of a trend over time. What is it? I think the most, beyond the numbers, it's not really about the numbers in the end. What it helps us to do is to understand, because you have to dig behind the numbers to understand where those values are coming from. And in doing so, it actually helps you, one, to realize that there are certain things that we need to be capturing more data on in order to really help us understand better what the impact is, such as for entrepreneurs, the revenues that are being generated, and what's kind of what's possible from one sector to another, the number of jobs that can be created, and what types of kind of businesses actually have the greatest potential. What are the trends for micro businesses to create jobs, and how does, for instance, those that are involved in technology based solutions, actually how does that affect? So it can open up kind of doors to other research areas that's really interesting. And it also helps you to prioritize, because if you see that there's a particular area, which is if there's a particular area that is highest in value in terms of the amount of impact that's been generated, then that helps you to prioritize that that's something that you really want to focus on. So it's been really helpful so far, and I can definitely, and we want, and it's a model actually we do want to make kind of give public access to, because a lot of work has gone into it, and I really feel that there are others that would probably really kind of value having something like that they can then build off or adapt for their own programs. So once we've kind of gone through a refinement process, then we will be making it as public as we can. So we're just looking into that. I'll pause for a second. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. That was really insightful. So the sector's shift toward basically a more rigorous and flexible methodology is not just informing your internal processes, but it's also fueling innovation, such as the SROI model that Standard Chartered came up with. And I think I like the idea of results that tell a story. And I think that alignment across various actors is also key to building stronger evidence bases across countries and programs. You also mentioned that this, in turns opens doors to other research areas based on impact generation. And I'd like to pose this question to you. So what are the interesting areas of inquiry you have explored or encountered in improving youth programs in your organization?
One of the big drivers that emerged from the recent, plugging in the year-end data that we generated for 2024, what was really, really interesting was for the employability programs, all our projects are designed to meet a target. The main KPI that we have for them, the main outcome KPI, is to get particularly disadvantaged women and people with disabilities into decent jobs. And decent has always been there as a term, and we actually use kind of the ILO definition for that, and work with our partners to contextualize it to the different markets. But we've never really given more focus on it than that. And suddenly the model revealed that actually a key driver of the impact value that the model was estimating is being created through these outcomes is because these jobs are decent and not what we've called vulnerable. I don't know what the what other terms are used for that. But in that, decent being, and what I mean by decent is you're working in this, you know, you kind of have safe working conditions, you have an income that at least meets, you know, above minimum wage. That you have some of those other kind of security kind of elements to it, a contract in place, etc. So, and there are lots and lots of jobs out there that don't have those aspects and can really, you know, and there's emerging research, there's probably, you know, ILO, there's lots of research out there that shows some of the impacts of that. So the model was able to capture this, and that insight actually has kind of forced us to take a step back and go, that's interesting. So if decent employment and the quality of employment is such a key driver of impact, one, let's make sure that we're all aligned on this, and that actually it's not a given that it's that we can get all the participants that come through our programs into decent employment, and that they will continue to be able to remain in decent employment. What things do, you know, are there additional things that we need to put in place in our programming to make sure that that's what we're talking about, that everyone's clear on what a decent job is in a particular context, working with the employers and making sure that they also are equipped and understanding what the challenges are. And it also kind of drawing on, like, we actually, some of our partners have already doing something on this, so we're talking more with them now on what does it mean for entrepreneurs. Is it like we work with micro businesses, you know, really small individuals who have just established a business and they're looking to expand it, but what does it mean for them to create jobs that are considered decent? Is this too much of a burden, or is this actually achievable, feasible? What support can be put in place through our programs and through others' programs to support them to be able to create decent jobs rather than just any job? Not saying that any job is a bad thing, but you know, if you can really create that kind of amplifying effect, impact through it being quality jobs that are created and sustained, then clearly that's something. So that it's kind of just created a lot of extra. Yeah, it's just revealed how much of scope there is to do more on that. So that's quite exciting, actually.
Thanks, Kate. I think it's incredible how your research is now zeroing in on decent work as a central metric. Neil, over to you. What areas of inquiry are front and center for your team right now?
Okay, well, I think this broadening of our understanding and getting a better, clearer understanding of the meaning and information content of programs is pretty, and the variety of approaches which can be used is an important development. We have in the ILO so-called task force on employment impact assessment, which brings together various colleagues from within the ILO who work on different areas, and we just produced a reference guide with a sort of how to very quick guide for the different methodologies, which I think and I think if nothing else, this gives, certainly also for myself, it was eye-opening because I got a better sense of a lot of areas that I was not. Also ex-ante, so-called ex-ante approaches to impact evaluation, which are essentially what they're doing is estimating beforehand what will be the impact of programs afterwards. There are a lot of issues to do with the precision, and I have to say, I maybe say that I'm of the view, there was a Cambridge philosopher who said once, I'd rather be roughly right than precisely wrong. And I'm really kind of that school. It's good. It's important, especially when one starts to look at social impacts and so on. It's hard to be, precision may get a bit lost, but I think it's important that we don't just measure what's easy to measure. And so we have a nice randomized control trial. We can very easily measure some things and not so much other. I think it's important that we make a serious attempt to get at the different sides of things and be aware of the different impacts that programs can have. The other development that I'm involved in and that I find very interesting is the use of new and different sort of data sources. So you have your standard survey-based and particularly longitudinal tracer survey-based estimates, but now we're using more and more satellite data to identify different types of impacts, not individual-based, but more the community-based impacts. But using satellite light data, for example, one can get a handle on what developments in employment and so on, and the complementary use of different sources. But I find satellite data, maybe also because I don't know so much, it's new to me. I find that a very exciting development. We use it a lot in assessing the impact of disasters, for example, and that's it's very timely. You can have it right away with AI. You can process the data relatively quickly, and it's becoming so. It's this kind of innovative ways of looking at questions that I think are very important.
Thanks, Neil. That was very insightful and informative. I think there is a lot of interplay of multiple interventions, which is a reminder that youth employment outcomes often emerge from very complex systems. Thank you for answering those questions. I'd like us to move to our Q&A session. For the participants, please feel free to post your questions in the chat, and the speakers will answer these questions once we go through them. So the first question comes from Kusimwa Francis, and this is directed to Neil. What are the biggest gaps that in our practice we have seen in most livelihood programs targeting NEET youth? These could be metrics seldom tracked, operational, levels ready prioritized, etc.
Okay, so NEET is really a sort of core area for me, and one of the things that a lot of my efforts in the last few years have been directed towards promoting a better understanding of the implications of NEET. Is now young people not in employment, education, training are now the focus of SDG Sustainable Development Goal for young people. That is measuring progress in youth labour markets. Well, young NEETs are not the unemployed, and are not just the unemployed, and getting that understanding is quite challenging, and it has a series of implications. One is most young NEETs are young women, and that has a series of implications, and it can very easily be missed. So I would say a broader understanding of this. There are programs which take into account, for example, family responsibilities that many young women face, and which obstruct their entry or re-entry into the labour market, and that, for example, is really an important gap. There are plenty of others, but I think I'll leave it there for
now. Thanks, Neil. I hope that answers your question, Francis. The second question we have from Mary Kiguro, and this is posed to Kate. What role can tracer studies play in improving the employability components of youth-focused programs, and how frequently should they be done for meaningful insight?
Thanks. If I can just add to the question, the answer that Neil gave as well, because actually many of the people that we target in our program are also NEET. That's kind of a big overarching kind of principle, kind of characteristic, is that they're also NEET youth, and we do prioritize women. And I think one of the things that we found is that it's one thing to, if you try and build in a gender kind of bias, let's say, and say, well, we want to do more programming that targets women, particularly disadvantaged women and those that are NEET, that, you kind of, the aim is just to kind of say, oh, well, 80%, we'll try and meet an 80% target. But to actually achieve that, to actually really make it accessible and inclusive, you've got to design it in. And I actually heard this great phrase the other day, which was, if it's not designed for women, then it's designed for men. And it's just thinking about the care responsibilities and all these other things that often women, particularly in certain lower income markets in particular, will have all these other responsibilities. So the timings of any kind of support or training that's provided, or mentoring, their access to digital tools, the logistics to be able to get somewhere, the social support that they get, all those, that all needs to be kind of built into the project design to really enable that to happen. And that goes for also people with disabilities. You can't just assume that by setting a target for yourself that it will happen. You've got to really work, kind of design it in. So that's certainly something that we found in the programming that we do on the ground. So in terms of tracer studies, so what we do, trace studies are really important, because without finding out, particularly in the SRI model, it really relies on some of the information that we'll be getting through those tracer studies, complemented by external research that's done, kind of independently. The tracer studies are we'll start with at the beginning of the program, and it's kind of longitudinal really, because it'll be asking various questions at the beginning of their kind of enrollment in the program, at various points along the way, and then the tracer study is generally a more detailed survey. And the way we have now, one of the big challenges is actually being able to keep track of people. And once your program is finished and the funding is finished, actually it's kind of, how do you then incentivize the partners that you're working with to continue, or to have the resources to be able to actually follow up with these people. So what we're encouraging them to do is set up alumni networks so we've built in longer programming durations, so that there's different cohorts of people that will come through a program. We were until recently just doing 1-year programs, which never gave them that kind of long-term view, and then develop kind of alumni networks, because that's really important anyway, for even the existing participants to be able to connect with those that have been through the program. But it also gives an incentive if they can then kind of help that alumni get something out of it, like connecting them with networks and potential employers, etc., do employment fairs, then you can kind of, you're more likely to get the responses through tracer studies. So yes, we do. It's generally on, if they reply, great, and the more you engage with that alumni, the more likely you are to get a response. And we have relatively detailed, but not a time-consuming survey that basically asks the kinds of questions that help actually to inform the results from the SROI model that I was talking about earlier, because we need to understand, well, how many people are in their household that they could be supporting? Have they managed to sustain a job? So sustaining a job after 6 months is really important indicator, and we also measure that. So we need to have these tracer studies, because it's one thing to get people into a job, but if they all then lose that job, it may be that we were supporting them to get into the wrong job, or we weren't, really equipping them to actually thrive in a particular, in a decent job. So that's actually means that the program needs to pivot and be tailored. So it is really, really important. You can obviously get a more intensive. There are some organisations out there who do, I think it was mentioned last week actually as well, that do these kind of very simple surveys by phone. So they'll design the survey, put it into the local language, and then do a kind of a phone survey to try and get some more, kind of a wider spread of feedback. And that's something that we're thinking about doing. We haven't done it yet, but thinking about doing, because obviously you need the budget and everything to do it, but towards the midpoint of our programming.
Thanks, Kate. I think from this, I like the idea that when it comes to, women, even as a vulnerable group, I like that there really is no in between with when you said that if it's not made for women, then it is actually made for men. I think that's quite something to think about. Because of time, I'd like to pose our last question to Neil. Are there models for collective MERL among organizations working on youth livelihoods so that we can pool insights and drive systemic change more effectively? Over to you, Neil.
Well, there are various approaches. I mentioned once before already that within the ILO, we founded this. It's an internally based, let's say, setup or network of practitioners within the organisation working on different methodologies in impact evaluation. I mean, we do now incorporate into so in this. I think I mentioned the work on school to work transition and youth employment policy in West African countries. We as part of the program there, we are implementing in collaboration the review, particularly of youth employment policies. We're implementing in collaboration with young researchers from the region, and this is precisely and part of the project is about building capacity amongst young people in order to engage on a larger scale in terms of influencing policy. I don't think there's any sort of sets. There are plenty of examples. We also have within the ILO, of course, we are the secretary of the Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth. So there too, we have a lot of youth-focused activities and engagement with youth and various resources. I can share the information of this, but there are a variety of ways. But I think there are some models. I don't know how. I would also like to add my to my support to what Kate was saying about this. I mean, it's very, and I think it can be applied more generally. One of the issues is that the concepts we use tend to come from high income countries, and that's true of NEET as well. And it's important to understand the implications and the context in lower middle income countries, which are quite different. I mean, for a long time, the idea of youth unemployment has a very different meaning in different contexts, and so a better understanding of this kind of thing is really important. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Thanks, Neil. I hope that answers the question. So as we wrap up this rich and insightful conversation, I'd like to pose a final reflective challenge to our speakers. And my question is, if you had a magic wand, what is one major change you would like to implement to see in MERL for youth? Perhaps, Neil, you can answer this first.
So just it's actually two. So more and better evidence, I would say, but incorporate. I mean, within that, I think, so I would, if I had a magic wand here, make it standard practice to have impact evaluation as part of every youth intervention. I think that particularly in national level employment, national employment policies and so on. But perhaps even more important, a better understanding of the information content of the evaluation. So what is the meaning of specific evaluations? And that's kind of what I've been saying throughout this. It's really important to understand the sense of what we learn, what we can learn from impact evaluations, and apply that knowledge to improve youth employment programs. And that would be mine.
Thank you, Neil. I could not agree more with you. What about you, Kate?
I actually was just rereading the last question that was posed to Neil, because I think that kind of resonates with my magic wand change, which would be wouldn't it be great to have an overall kind of MERL framework that is coordinated in collaboration with the practitioners and the programs on the ground, and all laddering up to see what contribution you're making to NEET, to SDG 8, and we then can say, right, we're applying this MERL framework in a completely aligned way. We have kind of aligned definitions, and the way we're approaching it is the same, and we are all kind of in it together to learn and adapt. accordingly. But we all kind of, there's a high level of confidence that we can trust the data that's coming through, and then we ourselves can kind of say this is our contribution. I think that's something that I'd love to for our program to be able to do. You know, whilst I mentioned that we do focus on NEAT as kind of the group that we're focusing on, that being kind of a key indicator of SDG 8 in terms of getting people into decent employment. What's not clear is the link, the link between what we're doing and how that might actually be influencing the NEAT rate in a particular country or globally. So just be, kind of having that coordination that can help bring it all together. And I think that is, to me, it seemed to resonate with the last question that was asked of Neil.
Thanks, Kate. I agree with you as well. I think it would be great to have an overally agreed MERL framework or coordination mechanisms that are adopted and contribute to overall results and insights. We have come to the end of our discussion today. I would like to thank you all for joining us today's rich and insightful conversation. Very special thanks to our guest speakers, Kate Salam from Standard Chartered and Neil O'Higgins from ILO, for sharing the deep expertise, practical wisdom, and of course, informed reflections on research and inquiry into youth livelihoods. I think we now know that MERL is no longer just about measuring results, but also about learning in real time, adapting with purpose, and also advocating for more meaningful impact for young people. Thank you once again to Neil and Kate for these very thoughtful insights, and thank you for joining us. So before we close, I have a few quick announcements. If you'd like to dig deeper into the topics discussed today, we'll be sharing a list of key resources and links, including relevant publications and toolkits from ILO and Standard Chartered. So please look out for these in the follow-up email. And secondly, we would love to keep this discussion going offline via the community forum. If you have any questions that we didn't get to or reflections sparked by today's dialogue, please feel free to jump in there as well. A link will be shared with you in the chat. Lastly, we'd really appreciate if you could just take a minute to fill in our short feedback evaluation form, because your input gradually helps us in improving this series moving forward. Otherwise, thank you so much. Thanks once again for being part of today's last session on the MERL Talk series on research and inquiry into youth livelihoods. Thank you.